Right now, somewhere in a port yard, a steel box is sitting completely still. Nobody wants it. Not because it is damaged, not because it is obsolete, but because moving it may cost more than it is worth. That empty box represents one of the most expensive unsolved problems in global trade. The industry spends an estimated $20 billion every year moving boxes that contain nothing. And even that enormous effort is not enough to keep the system in balance. At first glance, this makes no sense. A shipping container is one of the most useful pieces of infrastructure ever built. More than 50 million containers circulate through the global economy every year, connecting factories in Asia to consumers in Europe and North America, moving through ships, trains, trucks, ports, and warehouses in a continuous loop that underpins modern globalization. But hidden beneath that movement is a problem the industry rarely discusses. The biggest challenge in global shipping is often not moving full containers. It is moving empty ones. And sometimes the cheapest solution is not to move them at all. To understand why, you have to stop thinking about containers as cargo. A container is not the product being traded, it is the tool that makes trade possible. And like every tool, it only has value when it is in the right place at the right time. Every day, ships leave Shanghai carrying televisions, furniture, toys, and electronics, stacked 8 or 9 containers high across the deck. They arrive in Los Angeles packed to the top. The cargo is unloaded. Televisions go to retailers, furniture to warehouses, electronics toward distribution centers. The products continue their journey inland, the containers do not. Days later, many of those same steel boxes begin the return journey carrying nothing at all, sitting empty on the wrong side of the world while the system decides what to do with them. This would not be a problem if global trade were balanced, but it never has been. The United States receives far more containers than it sends back full. China exports far more by volume than it imports. Every major trade corridor has its own accumulation points where empty containers pile up faster than they can be absorbed. Millions of boxes sitting where they are no longer needed, while factories on the other side of the world wait for equipment so the next shipment can begin. Here is where the scale becomes difficult to ignore. At any given moment, as much as 1/3 of the world's entire container shipping capacity may be carrying absolutely nothing. The ships crossing the ocean are full. The containers stacked inside them are not. That is not a temporary disruption or a pandemic side effect. That is the baseline condition of the global container system running on a normal day. Which brings the industry to a question it faces every single day. Deceptively simple, with enormous financial consequences. When you have a container sitting in the wrong place, is it worth moving it at all? A used container may be worth only $2,000 on the open market. Repositioning it across the Pacific can cost nearly as much. Repairs to worn panels or damaged floors add several hundred more. Storage fees accumulate while it waits in the yard. At a certain point, the operator faces a straightforward calculation. Does moving this box generate more value than leaving it behind? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes it is no. And when the answer is no, the container gets sold locally, scrapped, or left inside the logistics system. Not because anyone forgot about it, but because the network made a deliberate financial decision and reached a conclusion. During the pandemic, these imbalances became visible in ways the industry had never experienced before. Consumer demand in North America and Europe surged as households shifted spending toward goods, ports became severely congested, ships waited offshore for weeks. At the same time, enormous quantities of empty containers were stranded across North American rail yards and European terminals, while exporters in China faced acute shortages and offered premium rates just to secure equipment. Some carriers, faced with the choice between waiting weeks for American exports to fill a box or repositioning it empty back to Asia immediately, chose to move it empty because the revenue waiting on the other side outweighed the repositioning cost. The problem was not that the world had run out of containers, the world had plenty, they were simply in the wrong places, and that is the moment the deeper logic of the system becomes visible. What the pandemic revealed was not a flaw in the network. It was the network behaving exactly as designed, optimizing for revenue, not for balance. This is where most people's understanding of shipping stops, and it is exactly where the more interesting reality begins. Shipping companies are not transportation businesses in the conventional sense, they are network positioning businesses. Their objective is not to move cargo from one port to another, it is to ensure that the right equipment is in the right place before demand appears. Because once a factory is ready to ship and the box is not there, the opportunity is already gone. The container that arrives 1 week too late is nearly as useless as no container at all. This reframes the entire problem. The shipping industry is not optimized to move containers, it is optimized to position them. That distinction changes everything. It explains why carriers invest heavily in forecasting trade flows months in advance, analyzing manufacturing activity, import volumes, and regional equipment shortages across dozens of markets simultaneously. It explains why moving an empty container across the Pacific can sometimes be a rational business decision, even when it generates no direct revenue. And it explains why the cost of these imbalances does not stay inside the shipping industry. It travels downstream through importers, through retailers, and lands quietly inside the price of whatever sits on the shelf in front of the consumer. The empty box that nobody moved is one of the reasons the product someone bought costs what it does. We tend to think of global trade as a story about products, but underneath all of those products is a much less visible operation that attracts almost no public attention. The continuous global effort to position empty boxes where they will be needed next. The movement of goods is what draws the eye. The movement of emptiness is what keeps the system alive. And that is why an abandoned container sitting quietly in a port yard is not evidence of failure. It is evidence that the network evaluated its options, ran the numbers, and made a decision. Because the most valuable thing a container can carry is not cargo, it is location. And right now, somewhere in a port yard, the system has already decided that this particular box is in exactly the wrong one.